Welcome to the week 2 go-to session. So this is the session of 4 such sessions we're having this month. Welcome back, everyone. We are in week 2. Just to give a quick update, I've graded 2 of my 3 sections. The tale of 2 bios. Remember, you had to write 2 bio paragraphs as part of the discussion activity for last week. And then I plan to use tomorrow and Thursday to grade your summaries that were handed in on Sunday. I have until Thursday at 5 p.m. to get everything graded for the week. Actually, let me check something real quickly. So we'll come back to this. We're in week 2. So this is how things look to you. So you have 2 kind of major activities this week, right? This guy worth 5%. And then this activity that's due Sunday, October 9th. That's tomorrow. Okay, we'll talk about this. This is not a difficult assignment. But yeah, one of the kind of challenges is that you can complete this activity just fine based on what you handed in Sunday. It would help, of course, if you had my feedback on your summary, but that's just one of the issues we'll have to deal with, right? That I'm still grading things while activities are being due. Last week I extended the discussion, the 2 bios thing, because so many people hadn't completed it by Wednesday. And I realized whenever we begin the course, there's some stragglers in week 1 because even though classes start on Monday, not everybody is fully on board on Monday. So if they choose Tuesday to truly begin, it may take them a while to realize, like, oh, wow, there's something due Wednesday. So yeah, I extended this 1.3 activity to Friday. But I also sent out an announcement about this, about how I'm not going to be doing that, okay, in general. Week 1, sure, because I understand there's some people who, for whatever reason, we're just a little bit late coming on board. But now we're in the full swing of things, right? We're in week 2. So yeah, be careful, because this guy is due October 9th. There is, of course, you can still hand in late work. The best way to do that is simply upload or submit whatever you have into the feedback box, right? The little comment section underneath the activity. Okay, even if the assignment is graded out as a 0, you can still complete it because I can replace that 0. There's a 5-point penalty for each day that an assignment is late, up to 3 days. So yeah, if for some reason you forget about a deadline, you miss a deadline, you don't have to take the 0 for it, okay? Still give me that work. Just upload it or use that feedback box to do so. Sometimes it will prompt you, like you actually have to type something into the box. You can't just attach a document, I don't believe. Or maybe you can. I can't remember. Anyway, welcome to week 2. Yeah, Christopher, you're in my 3rd section. So, 3rd section people, I'm going to try to get through them tonight. Okay, because I want those bios done out of my hand. Romeo, yeah, you're in my 3rd section as well. So the 1.3 activity I'm still grading. Again, 2 of the 3 classes have been graded. I just have to grade section 3 tonight. And then tomorrow and Thursday, I'll be focusing on 1.5. There's a lot of grading in this class, and there are 3 sections of students with at least 25 students in each section. So that's a lot of stuff to get through. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover in tonight's lecture. We'll talk about critical thinking. We'll talk about annotation, meaning your next task, now that you've chosen an article and summarized it, is to respond to it. And before you respond to it, you should take another close look at that article and take some notes, jot some things down. We'll talk about APA. It's not terribly difficult what you need to do for your response. Again, you'll be taking the same article that you summarized and handed in that summary on Sunday to respond to it, okay? And because you are going to be encouraged to occasionally quote from the article, yeah, we'll talk about how to do that. You got some practice with creating a reference when you hand in your summary. So yeah, we're talking about like a single reference and some in-text citations for whenever you quote something. Romeo says 1.3 changed from the 3rd sec back to 3rd of the 4th. Unless I did something wrong, Romeo, I think I set everybody's 1.3 assignment to be due on the 5th, Friday, because a number of students were panicking, saying, can you please reopen the assignment? And technically, I'm not supposed to do that because when a discussion ends, it ends, right? A conversation can't go on forever. because there are classmate responses that were part of that assignment. And when the discussion is over, nobody's going to come back to the board to read what you've written to them. But I did extend it to the 5th. I believe I did that for all 3 sections. So yeah, I'm still grading those. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover. So let's just get right into it. Here's a nifty quote from Einstein about what education is truly about, right? It's not just the learning of facts, but training the mind to think. Keep that in mind because you've probably heard variations on this, right? That it's not just about memorizing information, but actually doing something with information. I think the most recent definitions of intelligence also define things that way, that we don't measure IQ, for example, just by giving people quizzes on geography or math. Contemporary definitions of intelligence actually define intelligence as the ability to take in new knowledge, but also to apply that knowledge, right? So it's not just the learning of things, but the applying of those things as well, which is really what this Einstein quote is talking about. There was also a quote by, I should have looked it up before this session, but it's one of those Greek dudes, right? Aristotle, Socrates, Plato. It's one of those 3 guys who said something to the effect that the unobserved life is not worth living. So since this lecture is partly devoted to critical thinking, that's what we're trying to focus on here. And that's a big goal in this class, which we're taking step by step. So the summary that you handed in Sunday night was simply asking you to read an article and then explain its contents, right? What it was the author's main claim. Were they for something? Were they against something? Were they somewhere in between? And what were some of their main points or main examples that they used? So taking a lot of information that was included in the article and condensing it down to really its main argument and its main points. Okay, and this week we're taking it one step further, where now you're going to respond. And the reason why we had you summarize is not just to do a plain exercise in summarizing. No, it's the fact that if you've spent time with the article that you chose, if you took time to summarize it accurately, you should already be somewhat familiar with it, right? We don't just respond to things without first fully understanding them. And also, I guess maybe a secondary goal of this class is to get people to think more about critical thinking, how to look at things closely, how to look at things closely before responding. Okay, I don't want to get on my soapbox, but we're now currently in an environment where they're filled with ideas and opinions. They're not at all hesitant to share those opinions on anything. Music, sports, entertainment, politics, that's a big one, right? So people are very, very good at sharing opinions, but not always so good at like linking those opinions to actual things. For example, how many articles online have comment sections underneath? But then you read through the comments and you wonder, did they even read the article? Because, uh, sometimes the title already got them excited. So they just skip the article and jump right down to the comments section. In other words, we have a lot of people who are very good at making sort of knee-jerk reaction comments, but not so good at actually taking the time to look at something carefully and respond thoughtfully. So that's kind of a secondary goal here. Obviously, our goal is not to change the essential character of people in our class or to promote any particular political ideology, but I do think there is some benefit in general in being able to look at things closely, understand what they say, and then respond. Okay, so there's a reason why we're taking things one step at a time. Okay, so I've just kind of used this buzzword critical thinking. Do you know what critical thinking means? Like when you hear that word, what does it bring to mind? Anybody want to take a stab at kind of either defining critical thinking or even just sharing what a hallmark of critical thinking is? Because I am concerned it's kind of become a buzzword. You hear it a lot, but do people feel comfortable with what that actually means? Higher education, for example, loves to use it. Not insincerely, but yeah, it's pretty much the goal of any university, for example, to promote critical thinking. But does that make sense to people, or does it just strike you as a buzzword? Um, I'm seeing if anybody has thoughts on that in the chat before I say more. Donovan says, looking deeper than just the statement. Okay, yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. I know it's difficult to type lots of words in the chat or express things fully, but yeah, definitely looking deeper at things, right? In order to look deeper at things, you have to spend time with those things. Um, I mean, here's how I would define critical thinking, right? Critical thinking is the ability to analyze, respond, and also fold in like disparate pieces of information. Um, Brandon says critical thinking is when you take something, analyze in a deeper manner. Don't take it at surface value. Okay, good. Yeah, that's. Oh, if you kind of understand the gist of that, you do understand what critical thinking means. But yeah, it's what I was kind of saying earlier. Um, Taking the time to respond, to form an opinion about something. Right. That doesn't just. It's not just a knee-jerk reaction. And the final thing I mentioned there, folding in things from disparate fields of knowledge. In other words, you might be reading something which reminds you of something entirely different. Like maybe those of you who are mathematical minded or science minded, might be able to fold in something from the world of biology, even though the article you're reading has nothing to do with biology, right? It has this ability to make connections, which is why, even though I couldn't remember which one of those Greek dudes said that the unobserved life is not worth living, yeah, taking time to look at the world around you, make sense of the world around you, and that includes finding connections between things. It does, in general, I think, make life more interesting. So this is what critical thinking is about. Okay, yeah, taking a deeper look at things, taking a breath before we respond to things, making sure that we understand what we've read or what we've heard, and then presenting our own thoughts on something. Okay. And yeah, I do think critical thinking right now, for some reason at this moment, it's pretty important. Again, I'm not going to get on my soapbox, but we need more thoughtful people. We need people who actually take the time to read and hear what others have to say before responding. And here are just some examples of how critical thinking applies to your fields. Okay, so I have several slides here. Just identify your career. So graphic design, you all took creative presentation, which sort of is I just finished teaching creative presentation last month. And even though I tell my students that it's not a class in graphic design, I do teach some basics about layout, right? Not just throwing things on slides, but actually taking time to think those things through. Well, that's critical thinking, right? Choosing a layout, thinking about audience, that was a big thing in creative presentation as well. Remember, you had to create a presentation where you imagine yourself 2 years in the future, uh, creating a pitch to a potential employer. And I would tell students that they really did have to think about audience. Like it wasn't just this banal thing that we say all the time. Think about audience, think about audience. No, like really think about audience. In your bio, the Tale Two Bios was an example of this as well, right? By writing the one bio for friends written in first person and then writing the professional bio in third person, you're already getting practice at that, right? Like maybe some of you could even feel it that just by writing in third person, taking yourself out of your shoes, writing about yourself as if you're not yourself, right? That you're like an outside observer writing about yourself. That's practice in critical thinking as well. From word choice, so avoiding certain words that you would have used in the personal bio, to maybe not oversharing, right? In the personal bio, you might list specific things that you love, but maybe you keep those out of the professional bio because it's more important just to say, my passions and my hobbies include, music and video games, instead of listing which video games you specifically love. Um, anyway, I'll race through some of these. I'm not going to read all this out loud. But entertainment business, copyright and contracts, that requires close attention and thinking. Film, any budding filmmakers here, same thing. Actually, most of you who are kind of in the arts, right? So film, music, video games, you sort of know this already or should know this, that people don't just turn on a camera and film things and call it a film. There are choices that are made. There are choices that are made before you even begin filming. There are choices you make after filming in terms of editing. Those all require critical thinking. Same thing with game design, right? A lot of people mentioned interest in video games in their personal bios. I have a PlayStation 2, a PlayStation 3, a PlayStation 4. I hardly ever get a chance to play games because I'm far too busy. And the older I get, the less I am interested in playing. But I do play video games. But we all know, right? Those of us who do like games, you've played games that have, for example, flawed design, flawed levels. Some of those are understandable because bugs have to get worked out even after a game is released. But I'm talking about like massive issues or serious problems where the uh, game designers just haven't thought things through completely, right? And so on. Okay, so critical thinking, you're doing it. All of you are doing it. For example, here are a couple more career areas. Men, for example, women can too, don't misunderstand me, but men, for example, tend to apply critical thinking when they talk about sports. There are men who love sports, and they can talk about baseball or football in highly intelligent ways, right? Not just with passion, knee jerk reactions, although that's part of it too, when you're a fan and you're yelling at the screen. Um, but no, they also have an ability to reflect, to think, to analyze. Okay, so all people do it. It's just let's do it more often across the board. Okay. So here's an example of annotation. Um, and although you may not be doing this to this level with your article that you chose, this is just an example of someone who is very carefully reading and responding. And I'm not going to read all this out loud, but as you can see, here's someone underlines this thing here. None other than famous dog trainer Cesar Millan has written blah, blah, blah. Right? And they make a little comment that it's about ethos. Ethos is just a fancy word for the appeal to trust or authority, since this is a piece about lavishing animals that don't appreciate luxury goods, right? People who treat their animals like they're their children, including spending a lot of money on their pets. So here, not just taking a quote from anyone, but quoting someone who is a famous dog trainer. That's important because it's connected. Okay, that's a popular technique that people use. That when they want to quote something in support, they don't just quote anything by anybody, but they'll choose someone who, for example, is an expert in the field or seems to have knowledge about the topic. Okay, and you can see other annotations that they've made. For example, the idea of lavishing our pets with luxury goods seems nutty. Like that's an intentional word choice, right? That says something about the tone. The writer purposely chooses to call that nutty, and so on. The point here is that with your own article, you should be taking the time. And I have a little thing that I've created, which is going to give you advice on how to do this. There's no right way or wrong way to go about it. I tend not to write as much in margins, especially now that things are becoming electronic. That's not really a possibility anymore. But when I do have a good old fashioned book in my hands, I would typically just underline things. Sometimes put a plus sign next to it if it seems really interesting, because usually I can go back and look at the underlying thing and know why it's important. So I usually skip actually jotting things down. I will occasionally, but sometimes not. Uh, but this is the kind of and there are no hard and fast rules, right? The idea here is to take a close look at the article that you've chosen and try to identify specific moves that are being made. Um, and again, I have some other slides as well as something I've created that will give further advice on how to do this. Um, but yeah, you should be looking at your chosen article at a deeper level, right? The summary thing was largely about understanding your article at the level of gist. Again, what was the author's main idea, and what were their main points? Now, since you're being asked to respond to it, you should be going beyond that. Because in order to form a personal opinion, in order to respond to the article that you chose, um, yeah, it shouldn't be just a knee-jerk reaction. It shouldn't just be you spilling general things onto the page. And in order to avoid that, it means taking a close look at the article, which you already did for Sunday, but now I'm going to ask you to take a closer look at it again. So what are things you can focus on or note? Definitions, both if the author defines something, you might look at that. Why is the author taking the time to define something? Also, definitions of words you don't understand. I do this all the time. Believe it or not, even though I'm an English instructor, I do not know every word in the English language, right? So those really big words, sometimes they're called ACT words or SAT words. If you ever took one of those tests, one of the ways to prepare for them is to memorize this giant vocabulary list with fancy words like obfuscate and ameliorate. So if there aren't words that you know, take a moment to look them up. It's so easy nowadays. I do it too. You just like highlight it, plug it into Google, and boom, you got a definition. Uh, any concepts that sound interesting to you? Again, that's a pretty big word, concepts or ideas, but you should be noticing anything at the level of ideas that are interesting to you, either because you agree with them, because you disagree with them, or that you're somewhere in between, right? Now, tone is a difficult thing to sometimes identify. Some writers will have a very neutral tone, um, but other times, sometimes the tone is sort of obvious, but sometimes it can come across just in single words. Again, in this annotation, right? The choice to use the word nutty, like that has an impact on the reader. Or here, where the person is referring to an article in Wired magazine, okay, that was about research showing that humans care more about their pets than other humans. It included a statistic about family life that seems more perverse and disheartening. Okay, so that's pretty strong language, perverse. Um, so try to notice these moments. Okay, get a sense of what the author's tone is. Biases. Okay, so we have to stop here for a moment because this is a word that has become almost without meaning, or if it does have meaning, it's singularly negative. So you hear all the time, so and so is biased. You're biased, right? And bias has just become a stand in for the word negative. By the way, can I get a check in? Can people still hear me loud and clear? Yes, no, maybe so. Great, thank you. I was panicking again that maybe I'm talking and I've been disconnected. So we all have heard the term biased, but like other words like political correctness, or there are other ones where the word has become either so one sided or so broad that people don't truly know what the word means. Bias is not a bad thing, by the way. It can be a bad thing, but it doesn't automatically mean bad. Okay, we all have biases, right? There are values that I hold. There are things that I believe in strongly that I can't escape. I can try to keep them in check when they're not relevant, or I can try to keep them in check when I realize that my audience may not share those same values. But we all write from a certain position. I think the only kind of information that is without bias, are like purely scientific articles, right? Like a mathematical piece that's submitted to a math journal, or or maybe something that would appear in the news that is completely just like a timeline of facts, right? Um, but most things that people write are going to have some level of bias, but that doesn't automatically mean that it's bad. So be careful because you hear this all the time. You're biased. This article is biased. And really, all they're just trying to say is it's wrong, it's bad. And understand that bias is a richer word than that, okay? Sure, there are instances where people cannot escape their bias, and then it becomes a problem. Now, how can this apply to your article? Um, Consider who's writing it. Okay, who is the author? What is their background? What is their expertise? What position are they writing from? Okay, not to necessarily yell at them or tell them that they're bad people, but just so you have more information, so you know where they're coming from. Okay, fallacies. So fallacies are problems in logic. If you're curious, you can do a simple Google search for common argument fallacies. Like Purdue University has an online writing lab where you can look at logical fallacies. For anybody who's curious, I'll put the website in the chat. People are watching this lecture, the recording of it. You can just type in Purdue logical fallacies, and probably the very first result will get you here. So you can read about things like the slippery slope. Others you've probably heard of, like the straw man argument. The ad hominem is very, very popular. ad hominem is when you attack the arguer. You either insult them or point out something about their character, but it has nothing to do with the argument itself. Lots of you can spot fallacies just intuitively, and it's not that important that you can put a name to them. Um, I mean, I forget the total list of rhetorical fallacies. I think it numbers in like the several dozen, like 50, 60. There are just so many different fallacies. It's not important that you memorize every one or even any of them. But can you spot moments where there are contradictions? Hold on, let me go back to my slide here. Yeah, the ad hominem one is very common. The confusion between um, correlation and causation, that's another popular fallacy, right? Uh, a good example of that would be like video games. So if you ever get tired of people pointing to video games as for example, cause of violence, and we all know that that's untrue, right? That's an example of confusing correlation causation. Is there a correlation? Yeah, lots of times when people commit random acts of violence, you may find that they enjoy violent media, but that doesn't mean that the violent media is causing this issue, right? Um, and just your reactions. I would say this is super important. Like, what are your reactions? Just as you're reading the article that you chose, where do you agree? Where do you disagree? So let's look at a quick example. Okay. Actually, let me skip ahead to the next slide first, though, so you have some things to think about as I quickly read that short excerpt out loud. But when we look at this piece about Fortnite, what is the author's goals, aims? What is the author seeking to do? What is the author's main claim? Right? So, is Fortnite good, bad, in between? Does the author provide any evidence or counter evidence? And does this author have any authority to say the things that he or she does? Okay. So I'm going to quickly read this out loud. I know that reading things out loud isn't terribly interesting, but I'll go through it quickly, okay? In recognition of the fact that Fortnite has quickly become one of the most popular video games in the world, played by more than 125 million, I decided to play the game myself and attempted to understand its appeal. As a parent and a political theorist who focuses on education and its impact on democratic society, I couldn't help but notice how much the game seems to teach children the wrong lessons about how to function as an adult and interact with others. I came away from Fortnite thinking that the game is raising young people to be self centered, not good citizens. Some may question why a political theorist wishes to weigh in on the impact of a video game, but political philosophers going back to Plato have long recognized the influence that games have had. In the 18th century, for instance, and then he gives an example, okay, quoting Rousseau about games. So I'll stop it there. Again, reading things out loud is terribly interesting, but what does this person think about Fortnite? I kind of emphasized as I read, or you can jump into any of these. Like, what is this person's main point about Fortnite? Do they provide any evidence? This is just an excerpt, okay? This is not, I don't think, a whole piece, just 3 paragraphs. Should this person be talking about Fortnite? Yes, no, maybe so. Again, things don't have to be always one thing or the other. And when you respond to your article for this Sunday, you should keep that in mind as well. You don't have to completely agree, completely disagree. You are allowed to have a mixed impression of the article. So, any reactions here, or anybody want to answer these questions? Or are they kind of too obvious because maybe I did stress them when I was reading out loud? Does this person think Fortnite is good or bad? Donovan says most of his readers would not care. I'm not sure what that means. Are you responding to this piece here? Here, I'll jump in maybe. This person has issues with Fortnite, right? That he or she decided to check out the game kind of with an open mind, like, I'm just going to find out what this whole Fortnite obsession is about, but definitely reaches a negative conclusion, right? That the game is teaching children the wrong lessons about how to function as adults and interact with others. The author also came away thinking that the game is raising young people to be self-centered, not good citizens. Now, I've never played Fortnite. I know I've heard of it, but I have zero idea what the game is about. I know it's an online game, right? Um, a couple years ago was that building game. See that building game? What was that one? That was like retro, and you just built stuff and you built fortresses, and I don't know. Isn't Fortnite something like that, where it's a massively online game where Minecraft? Yeah, that's it. I don't think Fortnite is anything like Minecraft, right? But it is a online game where people team up, or I don't know. You can educate me later about Fortnite. I could just go to. Brianna says, I feel like this person has their own biases as a parent. Okay, good, right? Person is a parent whose children may play it, and that they are drawing conclusions based on their own limited experience. Okay, that don't reflect the experience of everyone. Okay, good. That's, by the way, that's a nuanced response, Brianna, because it's not that this person has no ability. Remember this slide? Authority. It's not that this person is without authority. The person is a parent and is a political theorist who focuses on education. So it's not that they're just a no one. Um, but yeah, Brian makes a good point. There are also limitations. So this person is an expert in some ways. They can analyze things. Person could probably analyze television shows, movies, video games, as not just a parent, but someone who's interested in political theory and its impact on society, right? But there are limitations. This person has never played Fortnite before. Can this person make this comment based on a single play? I have no idea, because again, I haven't played it. But I'm guessing that maybe Fortnite players could make the opposite arguments. Yes, no, maybe so. I have no idea. I didn't create these slides, so someone in our department did, who clearly chose this because Fortnite is currently relevant and popular. They just maybe didn't consider that I don't know anything about it. But I would guess that people who play Fortnite could argue with this conclusion, right? Um, Brianna said it well. Drawing conclusions based on their own limited experience that don't reflect the experiences of everyone. Right. Again, it's difficult to make um, such solid claims when other people might disagree. Christopher says in some areas you can argue the other way, but those aren't invalid arguments. Okay, good. Yeah, kind of the same thing. Um, and I do like this person definitely knows something about not just political theory, but like the history of games. So here they're quoting Rousseau, an 18th century French philosopher, who spoke specifically about games and how they shape people, right? So they're able to go back several centuries to help support. But yeah, we can look at just this 3 paragraph section and see that it's a bit more nuanced than we think. Okay, the person isn't an idiot. The person isn't just someone who has no business commenting on Fortnite. And yet it's also important to know that they're not a fan of the game. They don't have previous experience with the game. They haven't spent, hours playing it night after night. Okay. So these are the things you're going to have to think about your chosen article as well. Before I get to this, I do have I apologize because it's not the most beautiful looking text, because I made it very quickly. But here's some tips to follow. Okay, some of these echo what we just saw on the slide. And if you want, you can take a screenshot. Here, I'll even do it like this. So if you need to take a whole screenshot, you can. Or you can come back to the video after it's posted and just pause the screen here. But things you should consider while you're reading your article. Again, some of this you already did in week 1, which I've noted here. Why is it doing that? Okay, so number 1, read for gist. Gist just means overall understanding. You should have done this in week 1 anyway, right, with the summary. Write on the text or take notes. You can write on the text, by the way. I don't do it often, but there are times where I'll copy and paste the bulk of the text into like Microsoft Word so I can work with it. Sometimes I do that with students. They submit their submission directly in the feedback box, and sometimes it's easier for me just to take it, put it in Microsoft Word, so I can either embed comments or just deal with it more efficiently. You can do the same thing with your article. You don't have to. You could also just take notes on a piece of paper using pen or pencil, or open up a blank Microsoft Word document and jot down notes. But yeah, do take a close look at the article and note things. For example, number 3, note main ideas and main examples. Again, you should have done that in week 1 anyway for your summary. But if you didn't do the summary, or you didn't do so hot on the summary, now's the time to make note of those things, okay? Number 4, look up words, references you're not familiar with. 5, note things that the writing makes you think about. Okay, it's some pretty obvious stuff, okay? And then finally, think about where you, that should say agree and or disagree. And or disagree. And think about why, okay? Because your assignment for Sunday is not just to respond, again, generally or superficially or with knee-jerk reactions. Okay, so here's my little thing here: reacting versus analyzing. So for your response for Sunday, you're not just going to say I like, I don't like. No, you'll specifically pinpoint something. I agree or disagree with the author because, right? Reacting is just reacting. I like, I hate, this is boring, this is stupid. And sometimes those responses are fine, but not usually for sustained communication. Okay, knee-jerk reactions aren't terrible all the time, but we just don't want them for this class. Romeo says a 16-year-old won $3 million playing Fortnite. When my mom says stop playing games, you won't get anywhere in life, I pull up that article. Yeah, but what are the chances you'll win $3 million, right? Um, I mean, I do agree. Listen, I've never had like video game addiction, but I'm not an anti-video game person. Um, some games are quite sophisticated. I think we can all point to games that talking about. Remember earlier I said part of critical thinking is the ability to sometimes fold in ideas from other areas. Sometimes you see that in intelligent games, right? So a game might be futuristic or speculative, and you can tell they're responding to things about this world. Yeah, sometimes video games are much brighter than they seem. Other times not, but there's also evidence that, for example, it improves hand-eye coordination. When you pick up a PlayStation controller and you have to memorize L1, R1, L2, R2, L3, R3, like your brain is working. Uh, anyway, back to what I was saying: reacting versus analyzing. So, reacting is the author is totally right, but that's not enough. In other words, your response for Sunday should not just be like, I love this article. When he says this, I totally agree. I think he is spot on, right? We're pushing it a step further. The author supports his claim when she or he says X. The author is totally wrong. Again, you can see, I'm not going to read all these out loud. On the left, it's just very, very general comments. On the right, we're pinning it specifically to individual moments in the text, okay? Which is what you should be doing as well. Oh, nice. Christopher Ed says he had a professional sponsorship offer for video games in high school. I declined. Okay. Uh, yeah. Romeo says something I don't understand because it's about video games at a level. Like, I'm not into online stuff at all. I'm old school. I just like single player games. I don't want to socialize with anybody. Um, what was I going to say? I thought it was something. Yeah, there are some talented people out there. I had a female student who won. I don't know if there's like a large prize attached to it, but she won some Call of Duty competition, which was sweet because not only did she win, but she must have kicked a number of guys behinds to do so. I also avoid those games because I'm terrible at them. You kidding? I die in 2 seconds and can't aim. I'm I'm much better at other kinds of games. Okay, so let's start talking about the main assignments for this week. We'll come back to this in text citations. Okay, so this week there are kind of two main activities. The one that is due tomorrow night. Don't panic if you haven't done it yet because it's not that difficult of a task. It's called Check Your Flow. Essentially, you're taking your summary and color coding it. Okay, so the instructions are here. And it asks you to identify parts of your summary. We talked about this last week, okay? So you will take your summary and color code in blue the hook or introductory idea. Um, in other words, like the article's main argument. Okay, whatever word you want to use: main claim, main argument, thesis. Thesis is a very formal term, but you should be able to highlight what the important main claim was in the article. Topic sentences. If you remember last week, I gave a rough framework for how you might structure the summary. For example, devoting separate paragraphs to the different main points, and beginning those paragraphs with a clear topic sentence. So if you chose an article that dealt with, I don't know, movies, right? The author's first main point was, that would be a topic sentence, right? It's telegraphing to the reader what this paragraph is going to be about. Supporting details get colored in purple. Actually, let me see if I can. Never tried this, but let me see. Oh yeah, you have an example. Okay, that's what's awesome. You always have examples. So here, the main claim, or I'm not sure. We give examples that are not always perfect. So here, the entire introduction is colored in blue, which is fine because in a way, the entire introduction is capturing what the main thrust of the article is about. But make sure that you think it through on your own. Like, take a look at your opening paragraph. If you only get around to the main claim or argument in, let's say, 2 of the sentences or the final sentences, you just have to color that in blue. Green is for topic sentence. Almost always that is going to be or should be the first sentence of a new paragraph. It's just a convention of writing that we usually begin a paragraph with something that lets the reader know what the paragraph is going to be about. So usually has keywords like Murray begins by addressing how. Okay, so we're dealing with a specific point. And yeah, typically whatever else comes is going to be in purple because supporting details. Okay, so blue is for the article's main point. Green are for highlighting your subpoints, or maybe I should say the article's main points. And supporting details is anything you say in support of that, right? Specific evidence in red, your concluding idea in pink. I feel like I'm not explaining it that well, but it's less difficult than it seems. Basically, the stuff at the beginning of your summary should hopefully be blue. You should be identifying the main points or main arguments or main examples in the article that you read. Those will be colored in green. When you go into more specific detail about those points, those should be in purple. Okay. And when you get into very, very specific details or evidence, those will get colored red, which makes things incredibly difficult to read. Okay. So for example, it gets into details about the 3rd season of the show and specifics about what happened in the 3rd season. So we're getting pretty deep into details. So that's why that's colored red. And yeah, toward the end, you should have some concluding lines, either a concluding paragraph or some concluding sentences that should be colored in pink. Okay, so you have an example to look at. And the reason why we ask you to do this is we do want you to be able to identify what you did in your summary. You'll be getting, again, feedback and a grade from me by Thursday at 5 p.m., so you'll get more information. But is it that super important that you're able to color code all these different things? Not really, but it is important in the sense that for Sunday, it is important that you understand what you just read for Sunday, okay, at the level of what is the author's overall idea. So Fortnite guy or gal, clearly this is their claim, right? I can't highlight it. This is like what we would color blue. The game seems to teach people the wrong lessons, and it's raising young people to be self-centered, not good citizens. That's their main takeaway. Okay. So yeah, your ability to identify the main points in the article you just read will help you with Sunday's assignment because it gives you a starting point. If you're unsure what to say about the article, yeah, you begin with the things you identified in your summary. And I'm going to come back to that because I have some specific advice on how to do that. But first of all, let's talk about in-text citations. So my main advice is to either take a screenshot or come back to the recording of this lecture and just stop the frame here. Because if you can just imitate what's being done here, you're fine. Here, let me see if I can open up a blank document. So let's imagine that there's an article by Frank Smith that was published in 2012. Okay. If we quote directly, for example, let's say somewhere in our response to the article, we decide to say, according to Smith, and if we use the author's name in our actual sentence, we instantly put the year in parentheses. It's just a rule. You use the author's name in your actual sentence, you have to put the year. And then let's say we deliver a quote, blah, blah. You'll just have to imagine that I'm quoting him, okay? Blah. End quote. And at the very end, you simply identify what paragraph it appeared in. Let's say it appeared in paragraph 3 of the article. Okay. Now, I think all the articles you had to choose from are basically one-page documents where you scroll down to keep reading. That's why we ask you to identify what paragraph the quote appears in. If this were, let's say, a journal or a paper book, and there were page numbers, then you would identify what page the quote appears on, like page 3 or page 33. Okay. But since almost all of you, I think all the articles, you'll be counting paragraphs, you identify which paragraph it appears in. Now, you don't have to mention the author's name in your sentence. You could simply say, something like, halfway through the article, the author states blah, blah, blah. Okay, imagine that's a quote. And then we just save everything for the end. Author's last name, Smith, comma, year, comma, paragraph number. Okay. So if we go back to our slide here, that's what it's showing, that there are always two ways to do it. Okay. You can mention the author's name in your actual sentence. If you do so, you immediately put the year in parentheses. And at the very end, after the quote, you just identify the paragraph number. Or you find your own natural way to lead into the quote and then save everything for the end. So it can be a little bit confusing because it's kind of like choose your own adventure. Are you going to mention the author's name in your sentence or are you not? But yeah, that's the basic convention. If you can do this, you'll be fine. Okay. And every single one of your articles has an author's name, has a year. So we don't have to get into the exceptions. Like if there's no date, you would use the abbreviation ND. Okay. But I don't think that applies to any of your articles. But that's the basic shape that we're talking about. We're trying to simplify APA because in past versions of the class, it was more difficult. We just want can you create a basic in-text citation? And can you create a basic reference? Last week, I showed how to do a reference in real time. Okay. We talked about this assignment already, so I'm going to skip past this. Check your flow. That's color coding your summary that you handed in Sunday. The big assignment is the 2.5, speak your mind. So let's take a look at that. 2.4, excuse me. Okay, you have a video. You can read the instruction. For example, your response should be 400 to 500 words. That's approximately 2 pages, 1.5 to 2 pages. Same rules as last time. Use 12 point Times New Roman and double space. Okay, and so on. You have an example. Okay, you always have examples. But yeah, your goal is to write a focused, organized response to the article you selected for the last week's activity. You can agree, disagree, or have some mixture. That's an important thing. Okay, you don't have to pick a side. You might feel both ways. You may largely agree, but in some ways disagree. You might completely agree and disagree, or you might love something so thoroughly that you entirely agree or entirely disagree. Okay. You might add your own perspective on the topic or raise a point that the article leaves out. If this seems broad, that's on purpose. There's no single way to write a response, but I do have some tips, okay, to follow. And yeah, here's a note that says, in order to respond, you will need to quote or paraphrase parts of the article. So paraphrase means that you're going to express the author's point, but in your own words. Okay. Oops, where did I want to go? Here. Okay, so these are very, very basic things, but notice how the example that's included for this assignment pretty much follows this. So you're going to have an introduction. In that introduction, you should name the author, the title of the article, and put the title of the article in quotation marks, and its main argument. Okay. Also, make your claim clear. In other words, and it should go beyond just I agree with this article, I disagree, I feel somewhere in between. Okay. Again, it's the difference between reacting and analyzing. Like your main takeaway should be more nuanced than that. You might say something like, "While I agree with the author's, uh, while I agree that the author's thesis is fascinating and he makes a lot of good points, I nevertheless feel he leaves some important details out," or something like that. Okay. And if we look at the example, so the author is mentioned, Chris Reed. The title of the article is mentioned. Let's be honest, America, dogs are parasites, not man's best friend. Actually, a mistake here. When you put an article title in the essay itself, you do capitalize all these words like F, B, M. It's only on the references that you follow those goofy capitalization rules that I did cover in last week's lecture. That's another thing that's frustrating about APA is that it seems like the rules are idiosyncratic, meaning you can't make heads or tails of why the rules are such. You just have to learn them. Um, but okay, so the author's name is mentioned in full, the title is mentioned in full. The author here does tell you what it's about. Okay. Um, I'm sorry, and the author's not the author of the piece, but the student. Okay, the student. Their stance is clear. Okay. I'm trying to find if there's a good sentence to capture it. Like, I think this one, I mean, this is fine. Don't get me wrong. But I think this one deviates slightly from what I'm recommending. I mean, it does mention the article, it does mention the article's name. It kind of gives a sense about what it's about. Um, Let me see. I did this assignment on my own. I don't use it as an example because I went off the deep end. I went all over the place, folding in things that aren't really important. How did I begin mine? Summary. So I have a summary of an article I chose. I think it's this one, maybe. Yeah, so I chose the Guardian article by Stephen Smart. Okay, so I mentioned his name. I mentioned the article. I list his thesis. Okay, that franchise films and sequels should be viewed as more than just mindless entertainment or pure profiteering, for they offer viewers ways to reflect on the theme of time's passing. Okay. Um, anyway, let me go back. I'm not doing a good job of explaining this. Make it in the introduction. Yeah, name the author, the title of the article, and if you can, capture their main claim and what your general takeaway is. Okay, but here's the more important stuff: have 3 or 4 points in mind. So the important thing of reading the article closely is that hopefully there are like 3 or 4 moments that either interest you or stand out to you, or that you have something that you can say in response. Okay, you don't have to respond to every single point that's raised in the article, but you should be able to identify, let's say 3, because 4 might make it too long. 3 is a good number. 2 might be too few. I mean, if there are only 2 things you can respond to, that's fine, but maybe have 3 points in mind and devoting a paragraph to each point. Okay. Also, yeah, make sure that you either summarize, paraphrase, or quote directly from the article. You're in conversation with the article. Okay. In order to respond to it, you're sort of in dialogue with it. And to be in dialogue with the article means that you're going to be referencing it specifically, either in your own words, capturing what the author is saying, or sometimes capturing their words directly. And then, yeah, have a short conclusion where you echo or recap using different words your response to the article. And I do think that the overall shape here is that's what this is following. Okay. Um, so you can actually, here's the structure of this person's example. They mention the author's name, the article, and already is kind of presenting why he or she, John Smith, what his kind of takeaway is. Okay, that although he tries to disguise his argument weakens immensely when one considers blah blah blah. Then he takes time to kind of summarize the article, and then he gets into specifics. So we don't have like an exact structure to follow. But yes, it is in general important to have some sort of introduction, some sort of conclusion, and then in between separate paragraphs that have separate functions. So if you want to begin by naming the author and the article and presenting your basic stance on that article, right? Whether you agree, disagree, or feel somewhere in between, but also why, and then devote separate paragraphs to, for example, summarizing the article real quickly, and then getting into your individual points, that's fine. But you should be making sure that it does have some sort of logical structure. It shouldn't be like a single paragraph that never ends. It should have distinct parts to it. And I forget, I was going to say something else here. I can't remember it. Oh, you don't have to like constantly be quoting. Like this person, I don't think, yeah, they don't quote until the very end here. And again, you shouldn't be quoting just to quote or just because the instructions encourage you to. There should be a moment maybe where it is important for you to quote because it's important for your readers to look at the quote because you're going to then respond to what the author has said. Okay. Again, you're in dialogue with the piece. The other kind of rule of thumb that I didn't put down here, which is important, is with the two bios. I like the professional bio paragraph because it forces you to step outside of yourself and write about yourself almost as if you're looking at yourself from outside your body. I think that's a pretty good rule to follow in general. So after you've written your response to the article, read it as if you weren't you. I think I mentioned this last week, and I mean that literally. Like imagine that it's just been left behind on a cafeteria table and you're picking it up and you know nothing about this class, this assignment, or anything. Can you read it from start to finish without stumbling? Or imagine that you decide to publish your article response online. There are lots of article responses all over the place on the internet. Could a random visitor to your website read your article response and again follow it from start to finish? If you truly take that posture, if you truly place yourself in the shoes of a complete stranger, you should notice lots of things. For example, I see, and I promise I will wrap up things in just a second. But for example, I sometimes get responses that begin, "This article is really fascinating because," and then I have to be the mean instructor and say, "What article?" Right? Like right from the beginning of their response, their article response, it's problematic because this assumes that we already know what article the student is talking about. This is common because the ideas in our head always make sense to us. And in this class, sometimes students think, well, I know what the article is about. And the instructor, David, he knows what the articles are about because they're in the instructions and he's read the articles. So why do I have to take the time to explain things? It's just a convention of good writing to say things like, in Frank Smith's article, The Road Ahead, he argues, blah, blah, blah. Okay. It's something that experienced writers do. We take a moment to always explain things. We write in a way that a complete stranger would understand. We don't just assume that the reader knows things. And the way to catch things, like in this article, the student who begins his article response this way, he would catch that if he would read his own writing from the perspective of someone who is not him. And you can catch all sorts of things. You can catch confusing wording. You can catch moments where you haven't explained things fully. Again, experienced writers, we do this all the time. We do it intuitively. And sometimes we catch mistakes when we read over our work, but that's another hallmark, is that we read over what we've written, right, to sort of spot these areas. Christopher says, I'm pretty sure I began my last assignment with this article. Don't worry, you're not the only one. And listen, I'll point it out. like, but Christopher, here's a more important thing. Is what I'm saying right now making sense? That to begin this way is technically confusing because that's what I want people to see. Okay, good. Because yeah, it's not like I see the words in this article and I get angry and fail you for the assignment. No, no, no. It's just a comment I'll make. Sometimes by asking a question, what article? So it might seem snarky, but that's not my intent. It's to sort of make you realize that, yeah, you have to kind of look at your own words as if you are not you. And it's so common. So you're not the only one who does it. Um, anyway, I think that's basically what I wanted to cover. Did I forget anything? Uh, no, because we covered references last week. You'll also have a reference at the very end, but if you did your reference correctly for the summary, you'll just be carrying that over, right? Remember that was the thing that looked like Smith F. My F button sticks. 2012 name of article, then retrieved from. Okay, so yeah, you'll be carrying that over. So questions, comments, considerations. I apologize. I think I stumbled a little bit there when I was trying to give advice on how to structure your your article summary because neither the example nor the one that I wrote months ago is following that exactly. Um, Christopher, you asked two questions. If you missed them, okay, let me scroll up. If it's not capital in the title, do you still capitalize it when you list the title? Oh, do you mean like if the title of the article itself isn't following standard capitalization rules, should you um I usually fix things like that. Like let me see. Those who are don't have questions, you're free to go. But I'm going to field questions. Okay, so let's look at an example. So week one, this guy here. Let's see, is this one doing it? Yeah, like this one. Addiction. School officials take action to ease youth video game addiction. Um, I mean, I would say I usually fix it to follow whatever rules that it follows. Um, on the references page, though, you could capture it just exactly like this. For one, it's already following APA rules for the most part because it's not capitalizing for the references page. Remember, I said the reference page when it comes to the title of the article, you capitalize just as you would a regular sentence. So it's mostly doing that here, except the words addiction are all capital letters. And if you want to keep that, that's fine. And as for using the title in the paper itself, where actually you would capitalize these things, don't sweat these things. I'm not even sure. When quoting, would you keep it as is? Well, that's what I'm talking about. Like, okay, let me grab this quote with this title. Get my control panel out of the way. So, if in the text of the article I said something like, what's this person's name? Is there a name given? At the end, maybe? Is that the author? Karen Fisher Gray? Okay, so if I were like typing something like, in the article, get rid of that bolding because we shouldn't have that bolded. I probably would do this. Okay. The two would stay lowercase because small words like that don't get capitalized. Um, just because it looks better to my eyes. And I'll have to double check, but I am 99.9% sure that, yeah, if you mention the title in your actual essay, you do capitalize all main words. It's only on the references page that you do something wacky like this. Okay. right? Where all this stuff stays lowercase, because again, the rules is on the references page, you capitalize just as you would a regular sentence. And then you could decide whether you want to keep the all caps because that reflects how the author presented it, or you can fix it. But the main difference is kind of like this. Okay. And the first question you asked was regarding the assignment with color coding. Okay, let me scroll back up. I must have missed that. I apologize. Would counter evidence also be under evidence? Was that the question? Or uh, right, so let me double check. Okay, so let's get out of this activity and go into this guy. Would counter evidence fall into the category of evidence? I almost definitely think so, unless you could present. Like, I'm trying to imagine. I don't know which article you read, and even though I've read all the articles, I might not remember all the specific moments in them exactly. But yeah, evidence in general takes two forms, right? Direct evidence. So you might point to like an actual case example or an actual example, right? Maybe one that's happening right now. Um, I mean, I would say, I know this is frustrating, Christopher, but I would say think it through. Like, I would think that evidence and counter evidence are kind of the same thing. But if you feel that in your article, the counter evidence is really functioning more as like um, something else, you can color code it differently. But yeah, in general, I think that like almost always evidence, counter evidence are going to be here and you're going to color them red. Does that make sense? I should also leave some fears and say that I don't think I agree. I mean, I don't exactly read or grade these assignments with that kind of precision. I want to see big picture things, like can you identify the major parts? Never would I look at it so closely to think, well, I'm not so sure. Maybe counter evidence is more of a supporting detail in this case. No, I want to be able to look through and say, like, yeah, this person has it down. They can identify the main claim, they can identify the main points, they can color purple things that give further information about those main points. When they get into specific cases or evidence, they can color it red. In other words, like big picture things. I like to grade this assignment fairly quickly because, again, it's a lower stake assignment, only worth 5% of your grade. It's due tomorrow for that very reason. Again, it's not something that should take that much time. Um, but yes, I'm making things more complicated than I should. I do think it falls under here. Any other questions, comments, considerations? The big takeaway is that for the article response on Sunday, make sure that you do have a structure to it, okay? So no single paragraphs that go on and on and on, and that's your summary. Think more terms strategically. There's no one right way to write the response, but in general, there will be some sort of introduction, some sort of conclusion, and then separate paragraphs in between. What you do with those separate paragraphs, usually they're going to be devoted to different points you want to make. Yeah, absolutely, Christopher. The big picture is more important here. Oh, I should have mentioned earlier too. Yeah, make sure you proofread. Okay, because I understand that people aren't exactly grammarians, so I'm used to seeing the common errors that all people make. But then I do spot proofreading issues, or so make sure that if you're using Microsoft Word, that you use the grammar and spell check functions. Or if you want to use an online tool, I've seen television commercials for Grammarly. I haven't tried it yet, so I have no idea if it's really good or awful. But there are other programs as well that can scan your document for basic errors. Please do so. You're allowed to also recruit a friend as long as they're not doing the writing for you or rewriting for you. But if they can help you spot obvious errors, that's fine as well. You're welcome, Christopher. I enjoy these lectures too. And I will be here next Tuesday at the same time, 7 p.m. So I'm going to go and stop the recording. I'll hang out for a little bit because I think questions are slowing down. So I'm going to stop the recording now.